Hello and welcome to Heritage Foundation. My name is Andrew Parks. I am the program coordinator for lectures and seminars. Thank you for joining us today in our Lewis Lehrman Auditorium. I'd like to take this opportunity to remind everyone in-house to silence any cell phones. And for those watching online, you are welcome to submit questions by emailing speaker@heritage.org. Hosting today's program is Dr. Niall Gardner. He is the director of the Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom here at the Heritage Foundation. And with that, we'll begin our program.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Heritage Foundation. The Anglo-American Alliance, commonly known as the Special Relationship, is the world's most powerful bilateral partnership. It has been at the very heart of British foreign policy since the Second World War and central to US strategic thinking for practically all post-war American administrations. The military, intelligence, and diplomatic ties between the United States and the United Kingdom are unrivaled on the world stage, and London's close-knit partnership with Washington is in many respects the engine of the free world. Margaret Thatcher established the Thatcher Center here at Heritage back in 2005, specifically to advance the Anglo-American special relationship and the broader transatlantic alliance. And it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, the Right Honourable Philip Hammond MP, Secretary of State for Defence of the United Kingdom, who's joined us from a far sunnier, warmer place, London, on this exceedingly wintry and cold day in Washington. Today, Mr. Hammond will address how Great Britain and America are collaborating on strategy and defence capabilities, as well as how the UK is positioning its armed forces for 21st century security priorities. He will also reflect on British defence reforms that have already been enacted and how these policies are complementary to those of the United States. In addition, the Defence Secretary will assess the challenges faced by Europe and the transatlantic alliance by the mounting crisis in Ukraine and Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea. Philip Hammond was appointed to his present post in 2011 and has been the Conservative MP for Runnymede and Weybridge in Surrey since first winning election to the seat in 1997. He previously served as Secretary of State for Transport and held a number of shadow cabinet posts before entering government, including Trade and Industry, Work and Pensions, and Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Mr. Hammond was educated at University College, Oxford, where he read philosophy, politics, and economics. Please join me in welcoming Philip Hammond.
Well, thank you, Niall, and thank you for the opportunity to speak here today at Heritage. As you say, the weather in London is distinctly warmer than it is here, but if you've had the snow, we've certainly had the rain. That's been the tail end of the same weather system. Most of my constituents has been under several feet of water for much of the early part of the year. Heritage is an important voice in the debate about America's national security and a good friend to the UK, and it feels very comfortable for me to be speaking here under the same roof as the Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom, which does such great work under Niall's leadership to further the special relationship that exists between our two countries. And of course, the refocusing on Russia, one of the central challenges that Margaret Thatcher had to deal with during her terms in office, and one through which she forged such a close personal relationship with President Reagan, is a timely reminder of the importance of nurturing the special relationship, so that in times of crisis, when our opponents seek to sow division, the United States and the United Kingdom remained shoulder to shoulder, united in purpose. This morning, Secretary Hagel and I have discussed the current situation in Ukraine. We have a shared view of Russia's actions and the consequences that Russia must face as a result. After 2 decades in which the United States and the United Kingdom, together with our NATO allies, have gone to significant lengths to try to normalize our relations with Russia, we now face the very real prospect of a significant regression in those relations for many years to come. This is not an outcome we seek, But we have to be clear with President Putin. Russian forces have seized control of part of a sovereign country, violating its territorial integrity. The so-called referendum in the Crimea was an affront to democracy, and Russia's annexation of Crimea was illegal. As William Hague has said, this action represents the most serious risk to European security we have seen so far in the 21st century. In this period immediately following the Russian aggression, we have two shared objectives: to deter President Putin from any further military action and to provide reassurance to our allies in Eastern Europe. With thousands of Russian troops still massed upon the border with Ukraine, there remains a significant risk of the crisis escalating. That is why the United States and our allies in Europe have imposed a range of sanctions on Russia, including visa measures, an asset freeze, and a travel ban regime for those who undermine or threaten the territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence of Ukraine, and asset recovery sanctions against 18 named members of the former Ukrainian regime. Both the United Kingdom and the United States are clear that more far-reaching economic measures will be imposed if Russia takes further steps to undermine the Ukraine. We've also taken significant steps to provide reassurance to our NATO allies in Eastern Europe, particularly those which share a land border with Russia. Of course, all NATO allies benefit from the Article 5 commitment to collective self-defence. That commitment is and will remain at the heart of the organisation. But it is important that we reassure our allies in deed as well as word. And that is why the UK has offered Typhoon jets to augment NATO's Baltic air policing mission. And we continue to review opportunities to increase our involvement in planned exercises in the Baltic region alongside our American and NATO counterparts. In the medium and longer term, we all hope that Russia and Ukraine will be able to resolve this dispute peacefully through diplomatic means. But if Putin continues with his aggressive behaviour, we must be prepared to reassess our long-term relationship with Russia, not just the economic or the energy relationship, but our assumptions about their military intentions too. In the decades since the end of the Cold War, we've become accustomed to taking for granted the resulting peace dividend, a relatively benign Russia and the relative stability of Eastern Europe. And in the aftermath of the recent global financial crisis, collectively, European NATO has found it all too easy to err on the side of complacency and rely upon the American military umbrella as the ultimate guarantor of European security. The crisis in Ukraine, combined with America's strategic rebalance towards the Asia-Pacific region, means that those two assumptions no longer hold. It is clear to me, and this is a point that I make regularly at NATO defence ministers' meetings in Brussels, that European NATO countries must take on greater responsibility for providing security in our own backyard. We have to be able to answer the question that was posed by Secretary of Defence Gates in Brussels in June 2011. Why should the American taxpayer expend increasingly scarce funds on the defence of nations that are apparently unwilling to devote the necessary resources to be serious and capable partners in their own defence? In the long term, answering that question has to mean rising, not falling, defence budgets in Europe, and a much larger number of NATO allies meeting the commitment to spend 2% or more of GDP on defence. When we meet in Wales in September, NATO needs to grasp these challenges, and with the current events in Ukraine as a backdrop, reassert the pivotal role of NATO in our collective security and demonstrate that we are prepared to put our money where our mouths are. I'm under no illusion how tough it is for governments still facing significant fiscal and economic pressure to be confronted with demands for increases in national defence budgets. But events in Ukraine have shown that threats don't wait for times of plenty, nor do they give you much warning. So we must keep the pressure on our European allies to raise their collective game. And as growth returns to Europe, we need to see first a clear political commitment that defence will share in the economic recovery as it occurs, and then some solid progress across the board on a trajectory toward meeting the 2% target. Spend has a deterrent value all of its own. Increasing defence budgets sends a signal, and so too does reducing them. Its economy remains Russia's weakness as Europe and the United States recover their economic composure. We must signal a willingness to use our relative economic strength, as we did in the Cold War, to deliver decisive strategic advantage. Realistically, though, in the short term, we have to manage within the current envelope. So if we can't, in the short term, spend more, we have to spend smarter. We have to ensure that the $296 billion that European NATO members spend on defence every year, more than the Chinese and Russian defence budgets combined, for that money we get individually and collectively the best possible defence capabilities. The UK-US bilateral relationship is an important part of the underpinning of NATO, the only two large member states meeting the 2% of GDP defence spending target. And if NATO is going to be able to up its game, we need that relationship to be strengthened, not undermined. Yet all too often, I hear the sound of undermining. On this side of the Atlantic, people, some of whom should know better, directing often ill-informed sniping at UK military capabilities, questioning whether the US-UK relationship is any longer meaningful or of value to the US. Their speculation is slavishly repeated and amplified by the media in London in what risks becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. I'm acutely conscious that we have had to gap some capabilities and take some tough decisions on priorities. But we must stop beating ourselves up and face down the doom mongers. The US QDR calls for greater collaboration with allies and partners. And when I look around, while we have our challenges, I see no nation more capable than the UK of playing that role. No nation with the same depth and breadth of interoperability with the US. No nation with the same degree of alignment in diplomatic outlook and policy. No nation with the same strength of defence industrial partnership. So if the US is resolved to work with partners, as the QDR makes clear, the UK has a clear and credible claim to be the first in line. That is the way it has been for generations. That is the way we are both determined to keep it, no matter what the chattering classes may think. So let us, on both sides of the Atlantic, be a bit more confident about extolling the virtues of this enduring military and political partnership, about the benefits it has delivered for freedom, and let us in the UK be clearer in explaining what we are doing to ensure that we remain the credible and capable partner for the US that we need to be. We recognise that we simply have to deliver defence more efficiently, getting greater military effect from a given budget. In these constrained times, we need to look not just at what we spend, but how we spend it. In essence, defence needs to get a bigger bang for the buck or a bigger punch for the pound. A business would expect to invest to continually improve efficiency. Defence should be no different. I know, having discussed the QDR with Secretary Hagel this morning, that is something that has occupied a great deal of the time of senior political and military leaders here in Washington. It is also something that has occupied and will continue to occupy a significant amount of my time as UK Defence Secretary, as we put our forces onto a stable footing for the future. On coming into office in 2010, we inherited in the Ministry of Defence a $63 billion mismatch between our commitments and the available budget. Eliminating that deficit and balancing the budget has required some pretty radical and sometimes painful corrective surgery, reducing the overall manpower of our regular armed forces, cancelling some high-profile equipment programs such as the maritime patrol aircraft, which had run out of control financially and technically, and taking temporary risk as we have gapped certain capabilities such as carrier strike to allow us to invest in the future frontiers of defence such as cyber. In the immediate term, that meant that we got the budget back under control while ensuring that our troops on operations had the kit and equipment they needed to keep them safe and effective. And in the medium term, it has meant that we have been able to recommit to maintaining a broad spectrum of military capabilities with a new blueprint for defence, Future Force 2020, that ensures we will retain some of the most capable, deployable and adaptable forces outside the United States, and crucially, retain the ability to be highly interoperable with our US counterparts. 3.5 years after publishing our Strategic Defence Review, and with the surgery now complete, our armed forces are at last able to put the pain of force reductions behind them and to look forward to a period of relative stability and focus on capability development. Our vision, like America's, embraces much greater levels of cooperation and collaboration with allies. The US and UK already have a substantial and mature programme of deep collaboration on operations, on planning and strategy, in technology development and in equipment procurement, with F-35 and the Common Missile Compartment on our next generation of SSBNs, in the procurement of common systems such as Predator and rivet joint surveillance aircraft, allowing us to operate joint fleets with significant benefit to both nations. There are many more areas in which we can build on this collaboration to enhance capability and, yes, to save money. Secretary Hagel and I have agreed this morning that we should pursue this agenda vigorously to the next stage. This is a good moment at which to reiterate the UK government's continuing commitment to defence and security, and to put the record straight on some lazy misconceptions which I've noticed creeping into some of the assertions I hear from commentators on both sides of the Atlantic. The UK has the 8th largest economy in the world, now predicted, by the way, to become the fastest growing economy in the G7 this year. But we have managed to retain the 4th largest defence budget. Overall, we spend some $60 billion every year on defence, the 2nd largest spender in NATO. Over the next 10 years, we will spend over $250 billion on our equipment programme, renewing a wide range of our capabilities and modernising our fleets. We have accepted a gap in carrier strike capability, but on the 4th of July this year, the first of our new 65,000-tonne aircraft carriers will be launched. Supported by a joint training programme with the US Marine Corps, next year we'll see delivery of our first operational F-35s, which will fly from the new carriers, marking a significant moment in the rebuilding of our carrier strike capability and power projection capacity around the world, a capability that will be able to work with the US Navy and the Marine Corps, as well as forming part of a larger US-led force if required. In 2 years' time, we will formally order the replacements for our Vanguard-class ballistic missile submarines, while in the meantime we are spending $4.7 billion on designing, preparing infrastructure and ordering long lead items to ensure that our continuous at-sea deterrence posture, unbroken for 43 years, remains uninterrupted. Meanwhile, the Royal Air Force is experiencing a generational change with a fully modernised fleet of transport, refuelling and I-Star aircraft currently being delivered. The Army has the best protected vehicles and the best equipped infantry it has ever had, and a suite of battlefield I-Star and UAS capabilities that deliver a level of situational awareness that could only have been dreamt of a few years ago. And the Royal Navy is now taking delivery of the Astute class, the most sophisticated hunter-killer submarines in the world, to complement the Type 45 destroyer, one of the world's most capable air defence platforms. I could go on, but the point I want to make is that the UK is in the middle of a period of very significant investment and reorganisation of its armed forces. With a fully integrated force of 190,000 regulars and reserves, retaining our ability to deploy into the field a division-size force, our cutting-edge, broad-spectrum conventional capabilities, our world-class special forces, our unique intelligence network, the UK will continue to be able to project and sustain military power around the world. We will remain the most capable and most interoperable ally of the United States. But of course, capability and interoperability are not the whole picture. As we've found too often in past conflicts, having military capability is one thing, having the will to engage it, particularly when your homeland is not directly threatened, is another. This is the first visit I have made to Washington since the decision of the UK Parliament in August last year to vote against taking military action against Assad's murderous regime over chemical weapons. So I want to say something about that vote. I'm used to representing a country whose resolve and willingness to use military force is not doubted. Indeed, some of our European neighbours think we are a little too quick off the mark sometimes. And I know that there are some who, as a result of that vote last August, now question that assumption about the UK's willingness to use military force. I would like to reassure them. The circumstances, timing and facts of that vote were very particular. Even those who caused the defeat for the government were at pains to emphasise that its significance should not be construed more widely. It does not mean we have lost our appetite to intervene, and it does not imply a retreat from international engagement by Britain or the British people. Our economy, our geography, and our history ensure that that will not happen. We remain determined to continue to play our part on the world stage and to do so as an ally and partner of the United States. Over these last few weeks, we've been reminded forcefully of the uncertainty of the world we live in. That even as we face new threats in new domains like cyber and new areas of tension like the South China Sea, the old threats have not gone away, as we perhaps too complacently assumed. Against a backdrop of a heightened need for vigilance and continued fiscal pressure, we, the UK, and indeed the US, need our enduring military, diplomatic and political partnership more than ever. And NATO needs that partnership to underpin a renewed commitment to the enduring transatlantic security relationship. That partnership was forged in the dark days of World War II, honed on the Korean Peninsula, hardened as we fought and won the Cold War together, reinforced through our intelligence and nuclear collaboration, and taken to new heights in Iraq and Afghanistan. Today, it underpins a huge range of collaboration across operations, planning, science and technology, procurement, nuclear, defence engagement, and intelligence analysis. It has served us well. It has served freedom well, and it will go on serving us for many years to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Defence Secretary, for a terrific speech, a very robust defence of the special relationship and the fight for liberty on the world stage. We now have time for a few questions from the audience. Please do identify yourself first and any institutional affiliation. Please do keep your questions very brief, as we are on a very tight schedule today. And if I may take the liberty of answering the first question. With regard to the situation in Ukraine and mounting speculation not only about a potential Russian takeover of the whole of Ukraine itself, but also the threat in the coming years of a Russian incursion into the Baltic states, members of the NATO alliance. Do you feel that the alliance is robust enough, has the resolve necessary in order to stand up to Moscow in the defense of NATO allies in what could well be a ground war in Europe? I mean, do you believe the alliance really has the stomach for that fight, the resolve, and also the capability, especially in light of the fact that so many countries in Europe are underspending on defence?
Well, first of all, let me draw the very obvious distinction now between the Ukraine and the Baltic states. The Baltic states are members of NATO. They benefit from the Article 5 guarantee, and nobody should be in any doubt about our collective resolve to defend the territory of NATO against any external attack. I do not subscribe to the view that President Putin is irrational. I think President Putin is a careful and calculating actor, and I think he understands very, very well the distinction between member states of NATO and non-member states of NATO. So we must reinforce, we must reassure our fellow members of NATO of our resolve to stand by the Article 5 guarantee. We must review our readiness and our capacity to deliver a response should it be necessary. And from my discussions with my American counterparts, I know that they are absolutely at one with that view. So we will stand together in NATO and we will stand behind the Article 5 guarantee. I can assure you of that.
Gentleman right here.
Ed Verona, independent consultant. What is your understanding of Britain's obligations under the Budapest Treaty of 1994, which is interpreted by the Ukrainian government, or many in the Ukrainian government, as a guarantee of their sovereignty and territorial integrity? Would that include the possibility of providing weapons, sophisticated equipment, communications equipment? And if I may be allowed one additional question, there's much speculation about whether both of the carriers you mentioned will be deployed. Could you say a word about that too, please?
Yeah. Well, the Budapest agreement, to answer your question, factually, the obligation is to consult. That's what the Budapest agreement says. But we are clear that Russia has violated both the Budapest agreement, Russia's a signatory to it and committed to respecting the territorial integrity of the Ukraine, and has violated international law in the actions that have taken place so far. And the important signal that we must send, and I think we have sent, is that on the basis of the action that has taken place so far, there can be no acceptance of the status quo. The status quo represents an unlawful situation. The consequences of that Russian action will be enduring for so long as that unlawful situation exists. This is not something that can simply be swept under the carpet. Of course, we hope that there will be dialogue between the Ukraine and Russia, and that there will be a diplomatic solution worked out in due course. But we should not be in any doubt or hesitate in any way to be very clear that what has happened so far is unlawful and unacceptable. On the question of the carriers, we have a strategic defence review in 2015, which will take a decision about the operation of the second carrier. But I have been very clear in public about my own personal view, and that is that having invested £3 billion each in building 2 aircraft carriers, it would be slightly strange for the want of about £100 million a year of operational cost to mothball one of them. Having 2 carriers in operation would allow us to be confident of always having 1 carrier available, covering deep maintenance periods, refits, and so on. And that would allow us to change our doctrine, our approach, to the assumption that we would have an aircraft carrier on which to base our military response to any given situation. And I think that would be a very good investment for the Royal Navy to make, but the final decision will be made in the 2015 SDSR.
Ted Brown,
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Ted Broman from the Heritage Foundation. You spoke eloquently about the importance of collaboration between the U.S. and the U.K., among other areas in the area of procurement. Mm-hmm. One of the most important systems that you use, and we use as well, of course, is the Tomahawk cruise missile system, which, as you may know, has been zeroed out of the U.S. budget after 2015 federal year. This raises broader questions about the importance of U.S. responsibility in continuing to procure weapon systems that we both rely on, so as not to put Britain in an unviable financial military position. Can you comment on U.S. responsibilities in this regard?
Well, let me speak about the specific, and then I'll answer your general question. Very fortuitously, the Washington Post tweeted this morning about Tomahawk being, as you put it, zeroed out of the U.S. defense budget. And since I was at the Pentagon, I took the opportunity to ask. And I was told that there is no such decision, that the budgets in that level of detail for 2016 have not yet been published, and any such suggestion must be speculation at this stage. So I have to take that at face value. I've certainly heard nothing in London to suggest that there is an issue around Tomahawk. Clearly, with a weapon like Tomahawk, there will be substantial stocks held both by the US and by the UK. So if there was any decision about further maintenance of production facilities, we would need to look with our US counterparts at the existing stockpiles and arrangements to sustain them. But let me say this, because it's appropriate that I should make this point. Where we have joint programs with the United States and where we have a dependency on those programs, the administration, and I mean that generically, all administrations, have always shown a very welcome sensitivity to that vulnerability. By working with the US, we create a vulnerability for ourselves, and our equities have been protected, and I have got nothing but satisfaction on that score. So every time there is any resetting of the US defense budget, we of course look very carefully at what's happening around common missile compartment, what's happening around joint strike fighter, and every time we have seen our equities protected. So we're very comfortable with the way that relationship works.
Patrick Wilson.
Good afternoon, Secretary Patrick Wilson with the Babcock and Wilcox Company. My question is about 2 things you said. You said one thing about budgets in Europe, and that budgets going the wrong way could have the unfortunate implication of encouraging others to think that we're weak. And you said that Mr. Putin is a rational actor, not a crazy person. So I guess I'll ask the other part of that question then. Does weakness or our falling defense budget, does that invite attack? Does the transatlantic alliance look weak, and is that why Putin chose this opportunity to act in the Ukraine?
I think it's probably trying to analyze why the events that have happened. It's probably best to leave a little space and a bit of historical perspective to understand it. I don't think we can know to what extent we're seeing the playing out of a master plan and to what extent we are seeing sometimes opportunistic response to events that are unfolding, perhaps not at anybody's behest in particular. On the question of defence budgets, of course we have to address this issue, as I have suggested in my speech today, in the medium term. But if I phrase the question another way, if we had increased our defence spending last year rather than decreased it, would that have changed anything that's happened in the Ukraine or Crimea? I'm not sure that it would. I'm not sure that this is about a lack of capacity in the West. It's about how we respond and how we use the different instruments that we have, economic responses, diplomatic responses, energy economy responses, rather than just reaching for the military lever of power. I think it's about how we manage that mix of responses.
Gentleman in the corner.
Thank you. Tim Oliver from the Centre for Transatlantic Relations at SAIS. Minister, you spoke about the painful cuts that the British Army and the British military have undertaken in the last few years, which have also offered the opportunity for new ideas, one of which was a bigger role for the reserve forces, based in part upon the role that the National Guard play here in the United States. But as you know, there's been a problem over the last year or so that the recruitment numbers needed are not appearing. One prediction said that it would take about 433 years on current recruitment rates to increase. I know that might be a gross exaggeration, but there's clearly a bit of a problem. Is there not a problem developing here with the reserve forces and the role they're supposed to be playing in future that needs to be reviewed at some point sooner rather than later?
Well, believe me, it's being reviewed on a very regular basis in my office. In fact, I've got the latest weekly figures in my briefcase. We've had some technical problems with the IT system that supports reserve enlistment, which has not helped us. But look, we've gone through a period when we've been reducing the size of our armed forces, when we've been announcing redundancies of military personnel, when we're talking about running down our operations in Afghanistan, redeploying our forces from Germany. This has been a period of turmoil and uncertainty, and we now have to reset the message to people who are thinking about a career in the military, whether regular or reserve, about the future, that we have a stable baseline, a very strong investment in equipment, a clear structure to work within, and a mission to accomplish. And at a personal level, a very significantly improved offer to reservists in terms of remuneration, equipment, support and training. So we are confident that we can deliver the increase in reserves. Let me put it in context. We currently have just under 20,000 fully trained Army reservists. We need to get that number to 30,000 by 2018. In 1990, we had 72,000 trained Army reservists, and therefore we now have a significantly larger population than we had in 1990. This is not an impossible challenge. It is a challenge, but it's not an impossible one, and we're confident that we will be able to meet it. We have a raft of levers available to us, including further financial incentivization to achieve the numbers that we need to achieve.
Just a very final question. I know you have an appointment very shortly. Against the backdrop of continuing Argentine sabre rattling over the Falklands, could you comment on the British defence of the Falkland Islands? Is there anything the United States could be doing, for example, to help the British position at the moment?
Well, I'm sure you haven't thought about that particular issue at all now. Look, we have to distinguish between sabre rattling, capability, and real intent. Looking at what happens in Argentina is rather like turning back the pages of a history book to me. The classic politics of distraction. Whenever the going gets tough at home, you rattle the sabre again and whip up nationalist sentiment it is probably the only area that Mrs. Kirchner can be confident of having any public support around. But our assessment is that the Argentine has neither the serious intent nor the capability to pose any military threat to the Falklands. Our defensive posture on the Falklands is determined to maintain a military superiority such that the islands cannot be placed under military threat by the capabilities available to Argentina. We understand the position that the United States has on the question of sovereignty and self-determination. Of course, we would like to see a more robust position, but we understand the position that successive administrations have taken, and we are able to operate comfortably within that environment.
I'd like to thank the Secretary for Defence for terrific speech, and I'd also like to present a heritage tie for you to
thank
take
you very
back
much.
to,
Thank you.
back to London. But thank you very much.
Thank you very much.